Thanks, President Phillips. Members of the board, I'm going to start with the anti-bias, anti-racism policy resolution. Last year, when we approved the King Strong Plan, one of the main pillars on the King Strong Plan is diversity, inclusion, and cultural awareness. And we've been meeting this past year and several years prior with our diversity and inclusion task force. And one of the things that we want to make sure that we do this year is have actionable items moving forward. And what this resolution does is it's committing ourselves to actionable items and taking a stance on being anti-racist. So I'm going to turn this over to Kim Sellers, our coordinator of social emotional learning, who was also the administrator in charge of our diversity and inclusion moving forward. And Kim wrote this for the board, and I just want to present it to you so that you can see it and see if you have any questions about it moving forward. And I'm going to turn this over to Kim.
Hi, good evening. I'm not sure if you all had a chance to read through this or not, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. But as Mr. Ackerman said, this anti-racism resolution is our commitment to continuing this work that we've been committed to for the last 3 years. Obviously, we're at a time coming back into the school year and a time this summer of a lot of social unjust in our country, and we just really want to make sure that we keep the momentum going. We have a pretty strong diversity and inclusion parent task force that has helped us a lot on this journey and been very supportive and helpful, and we continue that commitment to them as well as our students in our community. As most of you know, there was a page that came up that some of the students had listed some things that had occurred in our district, and there's several other districts that this has come up as well. And I think the heart, as Ibram Kendi says in his book, the heart of anti-racism is the commitment to acknowledging that, and the heart of racism is denial. So we want to make sure that we are focused on this work and continuing to create that environment to everybody feeling included, an inclusive environment, safety, zero tolerance for anything. And then there's some on section 3 there's a lot of highlights and links that will take you to some of the resources. There's more, but these resources include are not limited to the following that we're using to guide our efforts in this work.
So when you look at the bulleted items there, that's what we're committing as a district to be able to move forward and what we're committing to do. One of the main bullets is creating a diversity and inclusion plan for the district, and continue to enhance the plan that we have. So, and while consistently measuring our outcomes, that's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th bullet down. Some other things in there are talking about board policies and policies that we can create to make sure that our students are definitely being looked out for, and that we are supporting all of our students, making sure that we're making that commitment to do that. So you can see in the bullets, and you've had a chance to read this, that this is what I'll be asking the board to commit to, and then the work that we'll do as a district moving forward to make sure that we are making that commitment.
The question is, I did, Tim. So is section 4, is that right? You have the 2000 to 2012 school.
Yeah, that's a typo.
Okay.
Our apologies.
Oh, no worries. So what you're asking us to do is consider this resolution to vote next week, and then as part of this, I guess I'll make sure I'm understanding that first bullet. There may be some additional work that we're doing as far as policy. The first bullet on page 2. Sorry, Deanne. As far as policy is concerned, specifically, right? Is that what you're?
Yeah, it's
right? Okay.
As far as the board, yeah, it's just recognizing, as Kim said, that as a district, we want to be anti-racist. And part of the solution is to look at our policies and what policies might we have to change from a board perspective moving forward. All the other bullets moving down are things administratively that we'll do as a district with the community, our staff, and our students to make sure that we have the right plan and actionable items in place to make this happen.
Right. Okay.
So it's a commitment.
Okay.
Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Well, actionable zero tolerance. What is, I guess, what is zero tolerance?
Yeah, we've had a lot of. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I guess my question is, when zero tolerance means, but what we need to define what happens when we say zero tolerance. Someone does something that's not appropriate, zero tolerance. We can all say nothing, but what is the actual punishment? What's going to happen? We can, that's, I think, where we end up getting ourselves into a corner is, well, we find some way, maybe either to justify the action, or that action was justified, but this action was not. This was a little bit, to the degree. I don't know, I'm not maybe Kim is better at explaining how we get to zero tolerance and what happens to someone that does something.
Well, I think with zero tolerance, that is something that it's not black and white. It's very, and it's going to be on a spectrum, meaning in terms of there's zero tolerance for any type of these micro invalidations or microaggressions or racist acts, things like that, that historically, and I'm not saying kinks, but historically as a country, just school districts, companies, people deal with those on an individual basis. And we're saying we're not dealing with these on an individual case-by-case basis. We are dealing with this for everybody. Everything will be dealt with. Now, what that looks like is still something that needs to be worked through and defined a little bit more clear. And the purpose of having this resolution is because we talked about wanting to have this to start the school year. The problem with going through all the policies and changing everything, I mean, obviously we've got a lot going on in our COVID and reentry and that kind of thing. And we didn't want to rush through and change policies and create policies. We want to take our time and be intentional and do this work right, because we only get one shot at it. So we have a lot of consultation coming our way. We're working with our task force. We're creating a district-wide team. That diversity plan that we roll out and we will bring to you this school year, it will be over several years, and it'll have a lot of information with outcomes and things that are measurable, reports, transparency. And this is basically our commitment to saying that's what we're going to do.
And Dan, I think to answer your question too, is you're right. A lot of people have different ideas of what zero tolerance means. And I think part of what we can potentially do, and that's why we're showing this to you a week ahead of time, is really maybe talk about how we'll define zero tolerance as a district to be anti-racist. Because, some people may think zero tolerance is if something occurs, then, you go right for the worst punishment possible. And to us, that's not what zero tolerance necessarily means. It just means that we're not going to tolerate acts of racism. So I think it will definitely have to take some time to develop and determine what zero tolerance means and define that.
Well, as far as voting on it, and I get the part that, we're, expelling someone from school for it's ultimately not to the extreme punishment. However, I feel that as a board member, it's hard for me to settle on a resolution or vote for something if we don't have clear steps involved, because to not show some kind of bias, how we let one individual continue to seem to say and do or have certain actions and others, nothing happens. yeah, I guess the zero tolerance is where I'm struggling with that, because we've had discussions, whether it was sexual discrimination or racism or what have you, that they didn't do this before. This was their first time. This was 3 times, but it was a different administration. And we're boxed into a corner of how to figure out how to, hold them accountable. And I struggle with those in our meetings on how to give guidance.
Yeah, we'll work on that and come up with something and see what the board thinks about it and bring it back to you Thursday and see what your comfort level is. I mean, I think what you're saying and what we're all saying is that there definitely needs to be zero tolerance against any form of racism, but we need to define what that zero tolerance means.
Correct. Yeah, that's where I was getting at too, Tim. So I'm assuming that's what that first bullet is on page 2. So this just gives us the resolution, but then to Dan's point, we got to do that due diligence in our policy creation, right?
Correct. Yes.
Tim, you're probably already aware of this, but in the title, there's also a typo that needs to be fixed.
Okay.
The discrimination is misspelled in the main title of the document. Also, on this bullet that we've been discussing, this first bullet where it says policy number blank, I'm assuming that refers to the 2260 in our existing board policy. Is that correct?
It could be. We just left it blank because we wanted to go through and determine what policy number. So we may not put a specific policy there. We may just talk about reviewing policies in general.
Okay. Well, because I was going to ask, so this doesn't supersede 2260, which is the non-discrimination and access to equal educational opportunity. This is something that works in conjunction and gives us like a working policy to deal with these issues. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was recommended by our legal firm not to change the non-discrimination policy. So what we would look at is, how do we incorporate that policy into this, but also talk about zero tolerance for racism. So we're still working on the logistics of how that would look, or do you have a separate policy just on anti-racism? So those are things that what we're committing to is to look at those policies. We're not committing in this resolution to changing any policy with this resolution. It's just to commit to looking at our policies and how could we possibly change them in the future to make sure that we have strong policies about being anti-racist.
Hey, Tim, I can't remember the companies, but we just changed about a year ago to someone that was writing all of our policy, Neola. So is that someone we work with them in conjunction with to make sure that it's, I guess, legal, what have you, but it's consistent, across all school boards? Or
yeah, absolutely. Any policy we would bring to the board, we would make sure that we work with Neola and our legal team to make sure that it's an acceptable policy for us to pass.
Okay, I guess I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because as I read the first bullet, it's talking about establishing and sustaining a school environment. And then it goes on to say that there'll be zero tolerance of all forms. So in my mind, maybe I'm looking at the first bullet wrong. It's talking mostly about establishing and sustaining that school environment. And that school environment should be free of racism. Am I reading that correctly or understanding it correctly?
You are. And then it says there will be zero tolerance of all forms of racism referenced in the policy. And so, if we have to change policy, that's what we're going to evaluate, but we may not to. But you're right, Mrs. Phillips. It's really about establishing and sustaining a school environment.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on this? Okay.
Other than, I'll say, Mr. Ackerman, I'm very pleased that we're taking a proactive stance and that the committee has worked so hard